Good morning, my name is Sanchez-franco and I am part of Team 1. Today we will be exploring topics related to violence, vulnerability, and recognition of conflicts and different types of violence. First and foremost, I apologize for not being there with you in person to present live, but I hope you can still enjoy and understand the information fully. If you have any questions or concerns about what I say, please feel free to ask any of my colleagues that they are equally prepared and informed on these topics as I am. Without further information, let's begin. Defining what violence is quite complicated due to all the branches and various sections in which it develops. But summarizing it a little bit, we could reach the conclusion that it's an act of force that causes or is intended to cause harm. The damage inflicted by violence may be physical, psychological, or of other different types. Analyzing its definition, we can see the importance of trying to minimize and eradicate any act of this type. It is very important to combat violence since it is a problem that constantly confronts us, and it can affect many people, both physically and mentally. It brings many problems to our society, and also the famous violence brings more violence. This is why we must combat this serious problem, which every day affects many people around the world. Those who experience it or are witness of violence may develop a variety of problems, including anxiety, depression, insecurity, and much more. Once we have established the first concept that we will be talking about today, we move to the second one, which is vulnerability. Being vulnerable implies fragility, in a situation of threat or the possibility of suffering harm. Therefore, it implies being susceptible and to receiving or suffering something bad or painful, having the possibility of being physically or emotionally hurt and damaged. Depending on the context, any person can be vulnerable, since in this society in which we live, many times those who are different from others are vulnerable, and it depends completely on the context in which the action is developed. But sadly, as we know, there are some groups which are usually more vulnerable, such as women, children, people with disability, migrants, older adults, or even people belonging to the LGBT plus community. The connection between vulnerability and the violence suffered by certain groups is a matter that demands thoughtful reflection. It highlights the sobering reality that some segments of society, including minorities, women, children, and marginalized communities, are disproportionately affected by various forms of violence. This relationship is deeply rooted in structural inequalities that permeate our societies, spanning issues such as racial, economic, and gender disparities. Such structural injustice can leave these groups without essential resources, legal safeguards, and opportunities, rendering them more susceptible to violence. Furthermore, social dynamics fueled by prejudice and stereotypes can intensify vulnerability, perpetuating stigmatization, discrimination, and ultimately acts of violence against these communities. Additionally, the concept of intersectionality underscores that many individuals belong to multiple vulnerable groups simultaneously, amplifying their exposure to harm. For instance, a transgender woman of color may face discrimination and violence that result from the intersection of her gender, identity, and racial background. Reflecting on this nexus between vulnerability and violence serves as a vital reminder of the urgent need to address systematic inequalities and foster a more inclusive, just, and empathetic society for all of us. Finally, we will talk about a third concept called recognition conflicts. Recognition conflicts are a psychological phenomenon that occurs when an individual experiences tension or discomfort as a result of holding contradictory beliefs, attitudes, or values, or when their actions are inconsistent with their beliefs or self-concept. Recognition conflicts can escalate into violence when individuals or groups experience intense cognitive dissonance, and their attempts to revolve and the dissonance led to aggressive or hostile behaviors. There are three main conflicts of recognition that led to a violent act, which are threats to self-image, dehumanization, and escalation through competition. Threats to self-image is when individuals or groups strongly identify with certain beliefs, ideologies, or identities, Any challenge or contradiction to this can threaten their self-image and their self-esteem. Second one, dehumanization. In recognition conflicts, individuals or groups may dehumanize those who hold opposite beliefs or values. Dehumanization involves viewing others as less than human, making it easier to justify violence against them. And finally, escalation through competition. That in some cases, recognition conflicts can escalate due to a competitive dynamic, particularly when there are limited resources or opportunities to develop. On my part, that would be all. Remember that you can direct any questions you have to my colleagues. Additionally, the information I mentioned is available on the presentation slides. So if you wish to take a picture of a concept, simply ask my colleagues to display the initial slides. I hope you have understood the diverse concepts that have been explained, as they served as the foundation for the rest of our presentation. My colleagues will now delve deeper into these concepts and reflect on their impact on our current society. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave you in the capable hands of my colleagues, Pablo and Maximiliano. Thank you.